I love this season of the podcast that I'm doing, where I'm going through races that I love, races that I don't know about, races that I've ran, races that I hope to run, or races that I know I'm never going to run, but it's just cool to talk about them, like Marathon des Sables. I'm probably not going to do that one, but man, it was amazing to talk with Megan Hicks of I Run Far about that. So just the range here, like there's more races than my body could ever possibly run. But I want to learn more about them. I want to hear more about them. I want to hear the human story behind them, of people who've tried it or the race directors of it. And today is one very near and dear to my heart. It's one of the races that I've ran the 50 miler, I've DNF'd the 100 miler, I've paced at it. It's the perfect, in my opinion, the perfect Northern Utah race because of the time of year and the course profile and the views. I mean, it's early 100 miler, so it brings out the entire community of Northern Salt Lake. Like, they'll all come run it. It'll be a fitness check for them as they're preparing maybe for their later A race. There are runners that, like Adam Peterman ran the Buffalo 50K, I think, this year. Like, one of the fastest runners in ultra comes out because it's a March race, April race. It kind of has bounced around a little bit, but it's the perfect, like, American West race put on by Jim Skaggs, who's just, it couldn't be any better. Couldn't be a cooler race. And over time, my guest today, Ben Sorenson, we've just kind of chatted online. He actually invited me the first time that my voice ever made it onto a podcast as it related to ultra running was when Ben invited me to be on his podcast. And so I knew that it was going to be eventually his time on mine. And as I'm going through these great courses, knowing that he just went for the Buffalo 100 and he got the finish, that it would just be the perfect time to reciprocate and invite Ben onto my podcast. So first, before we go any further, Ben, welcome. Thank you for having me on your podcast. What was that, December, January of this year?
Yeah, something like that. I didn't realize that was your first time being on a podcast, so I feel honored.
First time to be on a podcast talking about ultra running.
About running.
I had previous lives where I talked about different things, but man, when you asked me to do that, because I was already concepting, like, okay, I'm gonna do a podcast, I'm gonna get it going, and then you had me on, and I just so thoroughly enjoyed it. And that was a function of, I love talking about ultra running, and you were a great host, and it was just kind of fun. I was like, man, it got me really excited to get mine going. So thank you.
No, of course, and thank you. I'm stoked to be on yours.
Yeah. So all right, let's jump in. We'll talk about the course and do that, kind of get your story. You ran the Buffalo 100 2024, and you got the finish. Let's just jump in. What do you remember about it that makes you like sell it to someone else? Because in the middle of it, there's misery, and it's like, I'm never going to do this again, maybe, or whatever, despair. Now that you're this far removed from it, sell it.
Yeah.
What did you love about this race?
Well, first of all, I have you to blame for the sufferfest that was, the Buffalo Run 100. So got to give credit where credit's due. That I saw the DFL before DNF documentary, and I was like, oh, that seems like a good first try. I had ran a 24-hour race a few months earlier. My goal was to do 100 miles, and I didn't. I think I ran 100 kilometers, 65 miles or something like that.
Nice.
And but that was that moment where I was like, okay, 100 miles is possible. You start to learn what you're capable of. So I started looking for races, and a few kind of parameters on my end is, one, I saw, your DFL before DNF documentary, which, by the way, is just so inspirational. And the intro to that, I've told you before, your writing is, you're one of my favorite writers, and you're not even known for a writer, but you're one of my favorite writers.
Anytime you respond to my stuff, you make me contemplate writing a book.
You need to, about ultra running and philosophy and all of that good stuff. Because anyway, your writing is on point. And that's a lot of what kind of hooked me. I feel like Jim needs to give you a commission on, the registrations that come from it. Yeah. But a couple of other factors. I'm looking for help. I knew for my first 100 miler, I would need a lot of support. My parents live in the greater Salt Lake City area. So does a lot of my extended family. So I knew that I'd have help from, parents from a kid perspective, tracking down pacers and things like that. But it was also way outside of my comfort zone to run 100 miler. I think you and I talked about it a little bit on my podcast, but I get anxiety out there, and that's why I'm doing it, to overcome, the anxiety side of it. Yeah, and Antelope Island, because of the open nature of it, felt like a good next step for me. I had a high confidence level that I wasn't going to get lost, that it's somewhat of a loop course. it's a big loop course, and there are some turns you got to be careful about. But generally speaking, I felt like, the course itself was going to be perfect for that sense.
Yeah.
I actually loved the idea of that 22-mile out and back that you start and finish with,
For
which
the
most
backcountry,
people
yeah.
don't like, but it's I don't know. I liked that component of it. And it also made the logistics feel kind of easy because it was my first 100-miler and my crew's first 100-miler too. It was my wife's first time ever crewing me. So, studying the map and seeing, okay, how the aid stations worked. And they really only needed to learn 3 aid stations that they could loop back into and stuff like that. And then obviously, the American West and bison and, running with the buffalo and all the history that's on Antelope Island. What a cool place. It is challenging being at the end of March. I don't know if I'm all sunshine and rainbows today, but training for a 100-miler through the depths of winter here in Durango, Colorado was a pretty big challenge. And it was interesting. So obviously you start obsessing over these things when you sign up for them. So there's quite a few YouTube videos out there in the past of people that have ran the Buffalo Run 100. And I think it was last year, 2023, they canceled the race mid-race because of weather. Full-blown blizzard came through. They had to search and rescue people off the course. And I mean, it looked pretty intense. And the day before the race this year, it was just getting clobbered.
Oh, that's
and
right.
We were thinking oh gosh, here we go again. And Jim, I know this is what part of why I loved that race, the environment of it is it's very, there's not a lot of corporate hype. It's, I don't know how to describe it other than it's sort of grassroots feeling, even though I know it's been around a very long time. And before the race had started, Jim was telling us how, he had marked the course with flour. They lay flour with arrows for when you need to turn and things like that.
That's what they use?
Yeah. And he was saying, hopefully it's still there. Because it dumped the day before. And I was actually shocked to see that the course markings were fine, which was so surprising because it had rained so hard the night before. Awesome. But and I was joking with my wife, you're signing up for a good ultra based on what the shirt is. And it's such a no frill blue shirt with just the buffalo, black buffalo logo on it. It says Buffalo Run. That's when you're in for a good time, when there's not a lot of that other stuff that came with it.
The way that I would describe the all the stuff that you're talking about is Utah has this strong counter response to what's happening in the culture. We have some of the best elites right now in the sport are living in Salt Lake City. They're moving here. So there's this great elite thing happening that I'm a fan of. I'm here for. I love to watch it. I'm hoping to see a few Utahns on the podium at Western States, but by and large, Utah is a reaction to what I would call pop music, it's a reaction against Western States, against UTMB. It's just no, this is about runners
doing our thing.
If you think about all the great Utah races, the great northern Utah races that are super iconic, we've got the Bear, we've got Buffalo 100, we have Wasatch 100, DC Peaks, which is an emerging new race, Kachina Mosa in Utah County, Snow Peak, which is connected with Kachina Mosa. These races are the least sexy start finish lines. It's all about the runner and supporting to make sure that the runner does what the runner wants to go do. It's not about, at least outwardly. I mean, there's a lot of money to be made in races, even when it's no frills, there's a lot of money, but it just feels hey, if you want to run 100 miles at Buffalo or Wasatch or Bear or any of this, we will get in your corner and we will support you and we'll make sure that you finish.
Yeah.
However, this will not be the type of thing that's going to get coverage from Free Trail.
Right. Yeah. I'm thinking back, I'm sure there's sponsors, but it certainly didn't feel like it. There wasn't, the big banners at the finish line or anything like that. And it's kind of a sleeper race, a sleeper course. It's spectacular. You wouldn't think going into it, what on the list for me of, boxes that it checked for why I should sign up and do it, scenery and, the aesthetic beauty wasn't on it, but there's part of the course you go around, it's called Bridger Bay. And it's a really cool, there's a aid station out there that's part of a campground where your crew can't access. And I think it's like maybe a 13, 15 mile loop. I don't remember exactly, that loop, but man, that loop behind there is spectacular. And when we started running, obviously you start in the dark and, headlamps are on. And I had mentioned it sort of was storming the day before, but the peaks on Antelope Island were snow capped, and it just made for the coolest environment. It was perfect temperatures.
Yes.
You're running with these snow capped mountains behind you, literally seeing, bison and the buffalo on the trail and things like that.
Yeah.
And then by the time we had gotten to the Bridger Bay loop, it was, probably mid morning at that point. We were probably 30, 35 miles in. And it was just spectacular. 60 degrees, sunny, green grass. The Great Salt Lake was looking beautiful, and all these kind of rocky, mountainous terrain.
Yes.
And I think people overlook also how scenic that course is, just because it's on Antelope Island, but it is beautiful. It was spectacular in terms of the scenery.
I think some locals, and it's easy to do, take it for granted, because in the summer, Antelope Island is it's disgusting with these biting gnats. And so if you're a local, you don't ever really get to go visit it, because you're not really thinking about it in the spring. You're not thinking about it in the fall because kids are in school. So in summer, you don't really go. So it's like this somewhat, I don't want to get beat up for this, it's somewhat of a forgotten place. Even though it's a state park, it's got one of like 3 buffalo herds in the country. Like the pedigree of these buffalo have been preserved through the generations. But you're exactly right. I don't think about, when I'm selling it, I don't think come check out the scenery. Other than I'll say hey, it is there's some Mars-like sections of what in the world? It's not tree covered. There's no trees. There's no reprieve from the sun if it's sunny. There's no hiding from the snow if it's snowing. It's just super exposed. But what's amazing is you're spot on. I would not have thought about this either. It is stunning.
It is stunning
to get to see the Wasatch. Usually in Utah, we're up against the Wasatch. So it's cool because we'll walk out our front door and look up and see really high mountains, and it's cool. But you get perspective on the Wasatch and just see how beautiful that whole front is. And when you're on the mountainside of the course, which is a long stretch of what could feel like boring running,
yeah,
really, really wanted to run fast, it's beautiful the whole time. So I appreciate that perspective.
Yeah, and that was, so the second time, and just for anybody listening, I guess the best way to describe it would be a loop. But the way our course went this year is you started with that out and back on the Mountain View side of the lake, and then went into, I think, what they call the backcountry, which is basically a clover pattern of a couple loops over in the backcountry. So we started it in that order. We did the out and back, and then the backcountry loops, and then you go back to the start finish and do it again. And so the second time going through that out and back, for me, a mid-pack slow guy, was as the sun was setting. And it was spectacular. Right as we left the start finish and we're headed back down that out and back, there was a whole herd of bison on the trail. We literally had to go off trail and avoid them. And, I'm just taking selfies and just soaking up every minute of it. But then
what time of day is this, by the way? I think it's important to.
Yeah, this was probably, this would have been from mile 50 to 70 on that stretch, that out and back. So for me, I think that was probably early evening into the night, 6 p.m. to
so
9-ish.
You had some sunlight to help you navigate that, because seeing buffalo is terrifying in sunlight. It's horrifying
in the dark. Yeah, we had. I'll share another story with a after dark run in with the bison herd, but anyway, it was just spectacular. But what I was getting at, to your perspective of the Wasatch and the mountain ranges in the city and all that. After the sun went down and it was dark, you feel like you're sort of in the middle of nowhere. You're in the middle of this 22-mile out and back stretch on Antelope Island. You've seen your crew once, and by now the runners were pretty spread out, and it's me and my pacer or whatever it might be. But you can look across the Great Salt Lake and you see the lights of the city, and there was kind of maybe it was the twilight with the way the sun was setting or whatever, but you could see the Wasatch Mountains kind of silhouetted behind the city lights, and it was so neat. But then, to your point, 8 hours later, 3 a.m., 4 a.m., you start running into the bison again. And now you're, good and worn out. And that's a whole nother level. I think part of the waiver on that one is there's even instructions of what to do when you run into the bison on the trail and how to deal with it. And it basically says, give them plenty of space, and you're allowed to go off trail if there's bison on the trail. And there was whole herds, which I'm a wildlife lover. I'm a big hunter. And so part of what I really enjoyed about Antelope Island too was the wildlife. We saw beautiful, massive mule deer, pronghorn bucks, obviously all of the bison and the buffalo. And I know there's other wildlife out there too, but man, it's that side of it was so cool.
Special place. Maybe, I mean, just anyone who's ever in the area, even if you're not running, just don't go in the summer when the biting gnats are out. But to just go, there's a really great like visitor center there that gives you the history of the geology, but just in the history of the island and the buffalo. Like it's such an amazing piece of Americana out there to get. And then then if you're looking for a run, what a great one to go get to run across this Americana and take it in and kind of be a part of that.
Yeah, and for me, I'm relatively new to the ultra space. I've been running ultras for, I think I've run 4 now, 3 or 4. So it was, I feel like it's got that good balance of, it's somewhat forgiving. The trails are wide, they're softer, it's to use an elite term, it's runnable, as I limped my way through most of it. But and then though it does have the mountainous sections, which are, I think give you a fair amount of vert. And I forget the exact, I think it has something like 8,000 feet of vert total.
Somewhere in there.
Yeah. So we'll call it 7 to, make sure all our fact checkers. But for somebody who's sort of new to the space or a first 100 miler, that felt very approachable. Just from a terrain, trail system, topography perspective. So for me, that made it feel very, I don't know, inviting and a little bit less daunting than going and running with some of these that have 30,000 feet of vert in them.
Yes, there's 2 schools of thought right now that I'm finding very fascinating. Because I'm with you. Like I want my first one to be attainable. The first 100 that entered my realm of understanding. I mean, outside of Western states in the documentary was Wasatch, and that's 24,000-ish.
Yeah.
And so I was like, I can't do that for my first one. So that's why I picked Zion, and it was 11 to 12,000. But then, I think Buffalo is for someone who's wanting to ease into air quotes, ease into the 100 miler. It's a fantastic first race because of the community, because of the course profile, elevation gain, the whole experience, accessibility to aid stations for your crew, like all the stuff that you talked about. And then on the other end, there's people that I talked to that I spoke with Bree Sullivan not long ago. Her first 100 miler was High Lonesome, which is in the Sawatch Mountains, probably not terribly far from you. And it's like 24,000 feet of gain, average 10,000 feet above sea level. Another one I'm doing a deep dive into is Devil's Gulch in Washington. It's like these big, some people their first race will be these massive ones. But if you're not a masochist, Buffalo 100 is, I think, the perfect. And if it's the only one you ever run, it's also, you will not regret it.
Yeah. Well, and there's other, for a newbie like myself, and I had mentioned that it was my cruise first 100 as well. It's such a cool balance where you're out there, you're on Antelope Island, and, you're in the middle of nowhere and you're on your own, and, the backside of the island doesn't have cell phone service, and you've got all those great feels of a remote trail ultra, but you're also 10 minutes from a city. Literally, there was a time when, we ran out of bone broth and potatoes, and someone popped over to Target and got bone broth and potatoes. It's for those of us that are kind of learning as we go, it for me was such a great kind of balancing act of both worlds of, I obviously certainly felt like we were out there and on our own, but meanwhile the crew is, my kids came and left, and, we had a hotel that was very near there, so my mom could go stay with the kids at the hotel, pop over when they knew we were getting close to finishing. And
Yes.
there are definitely some upsides to the physical location of it as well.
Yeah.
And, you know,
Yeah,
and
go ahead.
oh, I was just going to say, and there's also, it brings out some elites too, you know, so for
Yeah.
guys like you and I that were a huge fan just of the sport, you know, and love to admire the elites and watch people crush it. There every year there's a couple of big names on the, you know, on the list, and it's so fun to toe the line with them. And then obviously they, you know, leave us in the dust and give you a high five on their way back when
makes no sense.
Yeah, they're already 10 miles ahead of you.
Speed off. Yeah.
I'm walking at the beginning and they're, you know, already at the first aid station. But that for me adds a fun element too. Like it's fun to see these people that I root for and, you know, admire on social media and things like that. And even just seeing their names on the list this last year, Ashley Polson was going to be running it. She was on the list. And I messaged her and I was actually going to podcast with her, and we're working on that at some point. She ended up not running it, but it was so cool because she sent me a message on Instagram the day before, just words of encouragement and, you know, saying to get after it. Matt Johnson sent me a message too from, you know, on Instagram, but it's just those settings where you get an opportunity to actually interact with these people that, you know, you look up to and admire on social media is really special too. And so for it to be sort of a no frills race, but still attract some of the big names, I think is unique as well. I mean, if you look at past finishers, there's a lot of very, really big names on it, which is just makes it cool.
Just about everybody has passed through there because it's first of the year race. It's the fitness check. But Carl Meltzer has like 3 of the top 10 course records, including the fastest time. It's like 14 hours.
It's crazy. Yeah. And I believe he ran it this year, and his son ran it this year too.
I didn't know. I don't know that. Does Carl have a kid?
Oh, maybe I'm thinking of somebody else.
You could be right. One thing that I'm confident of is that I'm rarely right.
And same here. So 50-50 odds. We'll look it up afterwards.
Yeah, why not? Oh man. Here's what I appreciate about you. I've been into this race for a long time, and a lot of your quote unquote talking points, a lot of the things that you're bringing to the table here are things that you're exactly right about that I have not thought about in terms of how beautiful it is. It's kind of like for me with West Texas, like growing up in West Texas, I would have never, it's just because I was so close to it. I wouldn't have thought, hey, this is beautiful out here. Now, when I go back after reading a book called Empire of the Summer Moon and going back to the area, it's like, oh, I appreciate this now. I think West Texas, the flatness of West Texas is actually beautiful. And Pauldura Canyon is an incredible thing. The way that you see Antelope Canyon, I think is really refreshing. And I just love the positivity of it. And you grew up here, right? Like you went to high school here?
I did. Yeah. And well, speaking of it being sort of I forget exactly your terminology of Antelope Island, but a forgotten place or something like that. I had never been. I went and did that one training run when I podcasted with you in the winter. And it was funny, I related so much to your stuff I ran pretty well. I think I set my PR in the half marathon that day training. So I started thinking hey, maybe I've got a chance out here. And then, and then, reality sunk in. But my parents are also born and raised in Utah, twice as old as I am, and had never been there either. So it is kind of got this, you need a reason to go out there in March. And, unless you're running or it's just out of the way enough that I think a lot of the locals don't make it out there. Because by the time you're thinking about outdoor recreation, the bugs are bad and, it's this whole thing. But man, it was 60 degrees and sunny, no bugs whatsoever, and spectacular to the point where it's like, need some more excuses to get out and play around Antelope Island.
Do you think that after this one, do you have, I got into it thinking I want to run a 100 miler, and I get in and I got, my third attempt, I did get the finish, but there's no, and 10 years later or whatever I am now, 8 years later, I'm actually dreaming about doing more and more and more 100 milers. After you doing this one, would you call this your first, meaning there's going to be a second? Was this such a good experience, or let's say maybe not good, but maybe positive, that this has launched you into wanting to do more? And if so, what are you looking at?
Incredible experience.
Yeah.
Good or bad, who knows, but incredible.
Yeah,
I'll say that
yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Life-changing. I got kind of dealt a hard hand. I got injured through my training, and I was just stubborn enough to go into this race injured.
Injured. You had a calf problem, right?
Yeah, and we have on video of me at early as mile 11 telling my wife that, you know, we're going to battle the calf all day, and then we battled the calf for the next day and a half.
Yeah.
So I didn't get a lot of the, like, you know, a lot of people when they see the finish line, they get that second wind. I had the finish line in sight and was leaning on my poles and just truly, you know, sufferfesting it through.
Yeah.
So for me, this is going to sound weird, but 100 milers feel bigger now that I've run one. Like now that I've done it, the concept of running a 100 miler feels bigger than it did before I did it. And I think for most people, it's the opposite. Like you learn that you can do it. And, you know, is it not my last? Of course not. I'm already looking at others, and I'll probably be back on Buffalo Run next year and all of that stuff. Good. But it was interesting. And I think part of it was just because I went through the whole thing injured. I joke that, you know, your feet are hurting when your eyes get swollen. And I was blistered from head to toe. I lost both toenails. Full blown injury. We found out afterwards I had stress fractures, and I was very hurt the whole time. So 100 milers feel massive to me now. But it definitely not my last. Yeah. And that's what makes 100 milers so special, is it's who you become along the way. And that's where I think the setting of the 100 miler matters too. I mean, there were times, and one of the great things about Buffalo Run is that open nature of it. There's at the end of the race, you're in that backcountry section I was telling you about, and you end up kind of looping around, and the final aid station, I believe, is at mile 94 or 96. And then you go, you know, obviously back to the finish line. But as you come around one of the corners of the mountain, you can see down into the valley, and it's kind of one of the main aid stations down there. There's a bunch of people camped in cars and, you know, pop-up tents and all that stuff. Those little things made a huge difference, because even the fact that you could see far, you could see like where you're headed. My wife could see me and, you know, come out and check on me and stuff like that. It definitely helped with those of us that aren't, you know, flying through these things in 15 hours. So that side of it, I think for me, the visual component of Antelope Island helped a ton with sort of wrapping my head around where that next milestone is, or where the next aid station was, or wherever it might be. So anyway, all of that to say, it's definitely not my last, but I have a whole new respect for how far 100 miles is. I'll just say that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, so here's part of like what I'm doing with Borderlands is I'm trying to paint exactly what you just talked about. Like, so a lot of times we look at the 100 miler, and the way that the existing media portrays it is like, look, you know, you see Zach Miller, incredible athlete, sprinting at the finish at UTMB, and it's like, oh, okay, that's doable. You could do that. And then once the average person, not even just the bad runner, like just the average, even the decent runner gets out there, to actually think about doing that at the last mile anywhere, doing it at mile 20. It's just like, oh no, this is not possible.
Not how it is. Yeah, you see elites like literally jumping over the finish line. Yeah. You know, I hobbled over the finish line, ugly crying. I'm just sobbing, you know, crying like crazy.
That's the average experience.
Yeah.
That's the experience that most of us are going through. So I think it's like what we see is like, hey, this is easy, it's doable. And I'm not faulting those media outlets. It's because that's so special. Courtney is special. Zach is special. I want to
remarkable.
I want to consume that. I love it. However, we're ugly crying at mile 20.
Yeah.
You know?
And I crossed the finish line, and I'm literally ugly crying, and I can barely walk. I'm, you know, using my poles as crutches. I mean, you paint just, you know, sufferfest destruction. And part of, again, what makes Buffalo Run such a cool experience is it's hand timed. Like there's not, you know, all the chips and the GPS tracking or anything like that. I mean, it's so grassroots in such a great way. Yes. And so I get to there's like a little tent afterwards, And Jim's there, the race director, such a good guy.
Yep.
And I'm ugly crying still. And I'm like, what, does anyone know what my time was? And I'm like crying. And I came across as like frustrated, but I was not. I was just crying and confused. So he goes over to the notebook and like looks it up and tells me what my time was and all that. And then you also get a buckle, obviously, when, you better get I say buckle or bust when you're running 100 milers.
Totally, yeah.
And then these really cool handmade like pottery mugs that they make for you as well. And I think they give those out for the other distance finishers too. Right. But it's cool. And that's what, it's funny, like, and I hope this doesn't come across as negative, but the buckle is somewhat leaves something to be desired. Simple. Yeah. It's not like your Leadville 100 giant Western blingy buckle. It's a little, buckle, this one's a little oval. And I think that's what makes that race so cool, is because it strips everything away and it's genuinely about running 100 miles. Yeah, it's a simple.
Buckle, that's perfect. The belt buckle at Buffalo is the perfect metaphor for the race.
Yeah, it's like, here you go.
Here it is. It's 100 miles. If you're doing it for the glory, if you're doing it for the belt buckle, if you're doing it for any of those other things, you're going to be dissatisfied. If you're doing it for you
to run 100 miles,
you're going to be thrilled.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's, at least for me, that made it so neat. Because there was, it stripped away all the other distractions. Mm-hmm. And, and there's just enough, though, support and, hype and excitement. And the aid stations are great. I mean, they do such a good job of putting on that race. There's zero complaints whatsoever. I actually like how understated it is. For me, it enhanced my experience because it was just special. Yeah.
It's about the human spirit. It's about the goal that a human has. And Jim will put on a race that facilitates, makes room for you to do you.
That's so well put. Makes room for your journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I like the whole range of races, but that one to me, like what you're talking about there, like that is American West trail running. Running. And that's why I think this race is special.
It is special. Are you going to run the 100?
So because my life over the next year, we're going to be in Paris most of the next year. I'm going to be in the concrete jungle. So I'm going to trying to run the Paris Marathon. And then since I'll be on the road for the most of the year, I'm going to try and get a road ultra in. There's
nice.
One put on, I think 10 Junk Miles puts on a road ultra, and I've been eyeing that one pretty close up in, I think it'd probably be in Wisconsin. But then when I come back, I've been toying with the idea of trying to get my ultra finish rate up to 50%. Because right now it's at 20%.
Right.
So I think the math on that is I need to finish, if I've DNF'd 8, so I need to finish 6 more. So I'm contemplating, once I'm back, the full year that I'm back, I'm going to sign up for 6 100s and try and get my finish rate up to 50%.
In 1 year?
Yeah.
I'm here for it. I'm going to be cheering for you so loud.
Yeah.
And for everybody,
it's good content.
Yeah, I can't wait. And for everybody listening, I got to run into Josh during that race. You were on a training run and got to take and that meant so much to me. Just so you know, that's why this community is so cool. I mean, I talked about the messages from Ashley and Matt and like some of these elites that I follow, but to see Josh Rosenthal out on the course and you ran a few miles with me, we took a selfie, that type of stuff. I wish that there was a better way to articulate how meaningful and impactful those interactions are. Yeah. I mean, I got a client out of Buffalo Run and a great, friend out of it. Yeah. That we shared some miles with and found out that his dad owns a business, in Bayfield close to here. But I need to thank you for that, by the way, you coming out and seeing me, because I was in a little bit of a low there. That was almost, we were closing in on mile 50 and it, we're definitely feeling it and having somebody, it's just neat. And that's where, again, the way you explained it, that Jim kind of gives space for, and I'm sure that stuff happens in the, the big ones, but also some of it can't, like the courses are a little bit more closed or there's, a little bit less access for everybody, or I don't know. It's just a little bit different. That type of stuff. That's what makes the sport so neat. And that's what makes the community so special. And I think that's what contributed to making that race so remarkable for me is there was room for those interactions too. So anyway, thank you for coming out and taking a selfie with me. I still have that selfie. That's a great, that was an awesome time.
My goal was,
and in fact, that's when you met Sean, and then Sean came and pasted Zion.
Yeah, made it in the documentary.
Crazy how that works.
I know. So when I went up there, I told my wife, I was like, I just want to go spend the day up there because I love the energy of the race. But I was like, my buddy Ben's running his first one. I'm going to go see if I can find him. So I went to the start line and I ran against traffic, thinking, okay, if I'm, just guessing on timing. Eventually, I think I'm going to hit him, at a certain point. And as I'm running against traffic, I've just seen like a dozen people, like local runners that I know, that like it's a race that brings out really like all the great locals. Like they're out there running the 50 or they're running the 100 in the 50K. Like it just brings out everybody. It's such a great community. And then I ran into you. I think you were wearing a yellow hat.
Yeah.
And you had been wearing a yellow hat a lot recently in like social media. So I saw you from a long way away and I started yelling your name. And then, ran it back in with you for a little bit, and then I took off and had to get home. But
that was awesome. Yeah, I'm trying to wear the bright hats whenever I can, run in yellow, and now I'm onto my pink one for a little bit. Yeah. But helps my wife spot me, and I wear enough, gray T-shirts at work that running's one of the chances I get to wear some bright colors, so that's kind of nice.
Well, Ben, thanks, man. You're the host of Chasing Greatness podcast, and I was lucky to be on it. I'm stoked. I'll link to that in the show notes, and let's definitely do this again. Right now, I'm chasing all of these race stories, but as topics change and they evolve, let's talk again.
That sounds awesome, and I'm going to be looking for your book.
Yeah, let's be in touch.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks so much, Josh.
Right,